No worries.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're listening or watching this. If you're watching this, you're one of the 3 people that follows us on YouTube, and I thank you for your support, Mum. I am joined today by James Elliot. Now, James Elliot is a psychotherapist. He is, or has been, in fact, my psychotherapist. And James has got a new book coming out, and that book is something mental resilience. And James is going to talk to us today a little bit about what this concept of mental resilience is, how we can perhaps implement it a little bit into our day-to-day life, and share some details as to why you might find his book beneficial. I think a lot of the people that listen to this, we've had really good engagement on our episodes that have talked about cognitive dissonance, emotional intelligence, that kind of thing. So I think it's going to appeal to a lot of you guys. A little bit of background on James before he tells you. He was in the army. Just in case you didn't know, if you follow James in any way, shape, or form, I'm sure you will know. And he is now based down south. James, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. For clarity, the book is called Think Yourself Resilient. It's about how we can empower individuals through practical skills to develop their emotional resilience, which you're right is a sentence that gets bounded about a lot, like emotional resilience, developing resilience. And actually, I think it's quite isolating and alienating for people who might think that they struggle sometimes with motivation, or they might struggle sometimes with anxiety, and they might struggle sometimes with performance, and all of the kind of generalized anxiety and depressive disorders and difficulties that might come through the modern life and modern living with performance. And that performance is a broad spectrum. There's lots of different variations of that. So the book is about how can we develop that emotional resilience. So the reason why I think it's important that we talk about it, and the reason why I've written this book, and the reason why I do what I do, is because I like to put across the key psychological skills and psychological models towards the development of resilience in an actual achievable and relatable way. There was a really brilliant psychiatrist and psychologist called Viktor Frankl, who he was a professor at Vienna in the psychological school in Vienna in the 1930s. Frankl, so he was Jewish, and it was not a great time to be Jewish in Vienna at the time. And like tragically, he was sent to Auschwitz. And he writes in his book Man's Search for Meaning, where he develops his own sense of therapy, so this new brand of therapy whilst he was there, that he identified within his first few weeks that all of the books that he'd understood about Freud and about Stoicism and Adlerian psychology, what he understood about it kind of went out the window, because there was very little space for the practical application of them. There's very little, like, he didn't mean it. It's just theories on behavior that didn't actually provide any kind of practical traction for him. So he kind of developed this therapy, logotherapy, which is the therapy of purpose, from that. And I think we can actually see a lot of the same things happening with resilience, whereby people are talking about resilience, but the actual practical and real world application of that is being overlooked somewhat.
So,
please.
While we're talking about practical applications, just to really simplify things for people who we may have perhaps overwhelmed already, if someone were to get good at being emotionally resilient, what kind of things do you think that would help that person with?
Okay, so if we're
going to persuade them to invest in this process, what are they going to see out of that? What's the benefit?
Well, I think first of all, emotional resilience allows you to seek with authenticity your sense of fulfillment. One of the harder things is being authentic, right? Being a true version of yourself and presenting that to the world, right? When you present a true version of yourself, when you're not hiding behind a mask, or when you're not pretending to be someone you're not, when you're saying, this is who I am, I'm a massive geek, here I am, I'm really passionate about the development of key psychological skills of resilience to help people find their subjective fulfillment, here I am. That's scary, right? Because if someone rejects that, they are rejecting a very true version of you. It's easy to be rejected when you're pretending to be somebody that you're not, because it's not who you truly are. But when you are presenting an authentic side of yourself to the world, and you're pursuing what you want to pursue with authenticity and with courage, and someone rejects that, it hurts a lot. So having that emotional resilience allows us to pursue what we want with subjective fulfillment, and whatever that might be. You might say, well, I want to be an IFBB pro, or I want to get on the Olympia stage. Or you might say, I want to be a Paralympian gold medal. Or you might say, I want to be a special forces soldier. Whatever it is that is subjective to you, that brings you that sense of fulfillment, emotional resilience is one of the biggest factors to success that we see. So your ability to understand that stress, pressure, anxiety, understand performance, to calm yourself, to know biologically and neurobiologically the effects of stress and fear and how you can overcome those. And that's effectively the essence of emotional resilience, that ability to understand yourself, understand your reactions, because somewhere between the stimuli, to the stress stimuli, and your reaction, there is a space. And within that space is choice. And within that choice is freedom. We don't have to be dissuaded because somebody else tells us that, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. We don't have to be dissuaded because something is potentially really scary. We don't have to be dissuaded from something because we view ourselves as unworthy. We don't have to be dissuaded from something because society dictates that we shouldn't. You can do these things, but it's about having that courage that comes from that resiliency to say, I'm going to do this, and taking that bold and authentic step forward. And that's ultimately what it is that I cover.
And clearly, because you've written a book on it, this is something that, although I've, full disclosure, I've been to James for therapy, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. But this is something that you feel people can work on themselves in I guess, in the home environment.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that's why you've written a book, because you wouldn't write a book on something to go, but you can't do this without someone holding your hand.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole purpose of the book is to empower an individual to have that agency. One of the biggest problems that we find with people who've really struggled with their resilience, who are maybe struggling with their anxieties, or maybe struggling with how they feel about themselves, their low self-worth, is they believe that they're always going to feel like that. I feel like this, and I am always going to feel like this because I have always felt like this. And that originates from childhood, and that originates from early experiences that are very, very much the foundations of which we build our lives upon. Everything that we experience as a child is a yardstick to how we measure everything else as an adult. If you are supported and loved and nurtured as a child, you are far more likely to find your sense of subjective fulfillment as an adult. If you are undermined, bullied, and have a huge amount of unmet emotional needs, you are far more likely to suffer as an adult with poor mental health, with a low sense of mental resilience. So the whole point of this book is to help individuals develop that for them. It's them, it's your power. Like, you have the ability, to change and shape that world. And that's something that, like, we've identified for, like, thousands of years. Aristotle identified it in the 300 BC, in that century there, 400 year BC. That's where he moved within, and he talks about this. He uses the term "we" all the time, which is one of the really wonderful things when you read philosophy. And Aristotle talks about we. He's talking about the same problems that they had then that we have now, which is being overwhelmed by fear and pressure and anxiety, being caught between moral dilemmas, not knowing where to step or how to step or what to do, about that authenticity and that bravery that comes with that. And he's talking about the same thing. So what I'm doing is I'm taking these key psychological skills for the development of that sense of courage, of purpose, of finding out who you are, of developing your self-worth, your confidence, being able to decide what you want to become and how you want to become it, and taking that step forward. And that's the purpose of the book, to help people develop that sense.
Okay. So I'm going to cover a couple of things. First of all, for those 3 people who are watching on YouTube, yes, I am eating a pot noodle for breakfast. Do not judge me. It's been a busy weekend. I'm going to ask James shortly something that I didn't prep him for. He might tell me to fuck off. But I'm going to ask if there's anything we can do in this podcast in terms of a short exercise or thought experiment that people can maybe try at home that will illustrate some of the things you're talking about. So have a little think about that while I waffle on for a moment.
Gotcha.
So I've always been really open on social media about, I've always been very, not anti-therapy, but very much of the opinion that it's overused, right? That it's almost a trendy thing to have. And I guess it's brave of me to have my therapist on the podcast because he could say anything. But I saw James last year. Those of you who, I don't know, actually, we haven't discussed it on the podcast, but I had a heart issue end of 21. And that left me, although I was physically fine by kind of February, having something that I'd always considered to be very, very weak, panic attacks. And I spoke to James and said, look, I'd quite like to fix this thing because it's clearly in my head, which means it's stupid, which James told me it wasn't, but either way. But I don't want to do all of that therapy bollocks. I don't want to talk about my feelings. I don't want to talk about my mum and all that. I just want to fix this specific thing. And James, of course, ignored everything I said and said, Yeah, sure, fine. We'll book some sessions in and we'll see how we go. And what I learned from that, and this isn't me recommending James as a therapist. This is me saying that it's a process that can work if you work with someone who's good. What I didn't understand before I went into that, and what I learned, and James may well correct me now and say that's not what you're supposed to have learned, you fucking idiot. What I learned was that the therapy thing was a process that I had to go through that at times felt mostly irrelevant to what I felt was the problem. And for anyone who is interested in trying it or has specific issues they need to work on, I think the thing that I wish I'd known is that if you start therapy, it doesn't have to be something that you do for the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be something that takes years and years and years to see results. I'd imagine if you go with someone useless, it probably does. But the key takeaway for me from that was that it's a process that might not seem entirely connected to what you're doing. I'm a very logical person. I've always wanted to go, well, if we add 1 and 1, we get 2, and this wasn't a 1 + 2, 1 + 1 = 2 thing. This was a 1 and a 5 and a 7 and a 3 thing, and then eventually you get to 10, but you don't really know how you've got there. Yeah. So yeah, it was an interesting thing for me, and it's been interesting to have James back on here nearly a year after I worked with those things with him. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, James, but I just think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the processes involved, and I imagine that everybody's experiences will be very, very different. I came to a specific thing.
So one of the great statements of Jungian psychology is that every individual is the exception to the rule. So as we often have these discussions, I'm not a big fan of people who say things like #success is a choice and #just work harder, because every single individual you meet has got their own very nuanced subjective problem.
Although you have been more successful since working harder.
It's definitely a factor to success, right? But also that success is facilitated by the socioeconomic demographic that I now find myself within, and the infrastructure that is there to support me. I also have several privileges that allow me to be in that position that I am in. But it is, it's a point that work rate is absolutely a factor, but it is not the deciding factor. So I think what we have to identify here is that every single individual has their own nuance, their own perspective on the world. And actually, that's what makes the world and life and experience so beautiful and fulfilling. The fact that every single person has their own perspective on the world and their own understanding of the world. And actually, we can use that to our advantage, and we can understand that. And what people often do is the opposite, is they dismiss their emotional needs because they don't consider them relevant or important. One of the greatest things that I see is people who will gaslight themselves, who will strip themselves of their own emotional needs by saying, yeah, but it's not, people have it worse. I mean, if we are going to compare mental illness to physical illness, if you're going to go into a hospital and you've got a broken leg, and you're going to say, I've got a broken leg, and the doctor's going to be like, but there's someone over there with 2 broken legs, so you have literally nothing to complain about. Well, no, I still have a broken leg. Like, what is this? And I think that's really important. So I try and use an analogy, which is, and I know that we've spoken about this, but a person can drown in a paddling pool, but a person can also drown in an ocean. So therefore, the size of the body of water is irrelevant. It's the fact that somebody is drowning. And here's the thing, my perspective on therapy is that you can jump in and you can save somebody, but that doesn't teach them how to survive the next time they fall over in a paddling pool, or the next time they slip overboard into the ocean. What you have to learn to do is teach somebody how to swim, but you can only teach somebody how to swim truly if you have had to swim. And so that's part of the reason why I became a psychotherapist, is I'm very public about my own struggles and diagnoses with mental health, my own difficulties, and coming from childhood trauma and coming from childhood abuse and coming from poverty and joining the military to escape and then finding myself here, taking that and going, I've had to learn how to swim. Like, my resilience is not purely textbook. It's the application of those theories, of those models, and how can we make that work? And the best thing that I have found is taking that lived experience, processing it. So it's not just a case of, well, this is what I did, so this is what you should do, because as previously discussed, everyone is nuanced and subjective and sees the world from a different perspective. So to say, this is what I did, so this is what you should do, it's very naive. We call it the naive psychologist approach. Like, that's a very naive thing to say. So instead of taking that, this is what I did, so this is what you should be doing, saying, this is what I did, this is what the academic and the studies reveal. So this is what you could do. You could also try this, and you can also try that. And this is the effects that we can see. Particularly, I find within the bodybuilding world, what people really relate to is the neurobiology. The fact that there are tangible changes that are going on in your brain, neural patterns that are realigning for a process of neuroplasticity, departments speaking to each other more clearly, understanding the biological and neurobiological processes that are happening that are explaining why it is that you feel the way that you feel and why you're having the emotion that you're having. You can understand that process. Even someone who turns up at therapy and says, I don't want to talk about my emotions, goes, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. Like, oh, so there's an actual biological process. Yeah, there's something going on there that we can understand and we can use. And then I can take that and go, right, well, yeah, right. If you're feeling this certain way, your body is constantly trying to speak to you. Our subconscious communicates to us through our body. It ties directly into our central nervous system, and it is constantly speaking to us. When we see something we like, our parasympathetic nervous system is activated, which makes us feel good and calm. When we see something that we don't like, our sympathetic nervous system is alarmed, and that's, a little bit of tension, a little bit of fear, a bit of a pulsing heart rate. And so therefore, actually, our subconscious is constantly trying to speak to us. So actually being like scientifically educated, for those who can't see, I'm doing the quotation marks with my finger because like neurobiology and neuroscience is just such an ever expanding field at the moment. It's incredible. But actually being educated on how your body is responding to the world around you allows you to manage it far better. So that element of emotional intelligence, we consider emotional intelligence to be like I think it's like 5 different factors. And one of those is self-awareness. If you are aware of what your subconscious is trying to tell you at all times, if you are calm and relaxed and can feel and understand what your body's trying to tell you, that allows you to manage your emotional responses. If you can feel that fear in your stomach, and if you can feel that pounding heart rate, you can say, right, that is my body trying to tell me that it is scared. But that subconscious response is based upon previous memory. So as I spoke about before, your childhood, everything that we learn at childhood becomes a yardstick for which we measure everything as an adult. So when you see like these like TikTok videos of these 8-year-olds on BMXs doing backflips off a half pipe, and you're like, well, I wasn't doing that at 8. No, you weren't. But they've learned not to fear it because that's the environment in which they grew up in. Whilst like from falling out of trees and playing rugby, there's lots of kids who go, I wouldn't want to play rugby, but I grew up playing rugby, so it doesn't faze me. So our yardstick, our experiences of childhood, are what we measure the real world in as adults. So when you're having this fear response, understanding, well, actually, what is it about this current situation that is reminding me of something from my past, and how is that past experience not relevant to this current one? And if you can understand what your subconscious is trying to tell you through the feelings of your body and the emotions that is consciously giving you, then you can then say, I'm going to choose to do something else. And there's lots of different things that you can choose to do, from breathing exercises to cognitive patterns to all sorts you can then do to learn to manage that. But the first step is always being really incredibly in tune with your emotional responses. And just to kind of put a little bit of proof onto that, there's lots of studies that reinforce that. So what was really interesting, say for example, the Dalai Lama, who spends a huge proportion of his time meditating and being mindful. In an fMRI, so a functional MRI scan of his brain, they revealed there are far greater axial connections between his amygdala and his prefrontal cortex. So his amygdala is his subconscious emotional response, and his prefrontal cortex is his conscious reasoning. And when exposed to threat or danger, there was still the response from his amygdala that we expected in the control group. But then his prefrontal cortex became engaged, and then the reactions within his amygdala shrunk greatly. What we're saying is that he's a human being. It's not that he doesn't have that survival instinct, that we need to survive. This reminds us of something from my childhood. This is scary. This is stress. This is pressure. But what I am saying is that he had that, and then he went, calm, breathe, relax my body. I am safe. And he can do that. I mean, that's with years and years of practice, but actually over an 8-week period, we can see changes of the brain happening, those greater connections and that reduction of that emotional response through 8 weeks of training. That's it, 8 weeks. So, yeah, it is incredibly fascinating, and that ability to understand and know what your body is trying to tell you is the first step to developing your emotional resilience.
Good. And so there's 2 things there. First of all is, have you had a think about whether you've got any activities we can play along with at home, or something we could think about that might determine whether we would benefit from potentially your book, potentially from therapy? or
Oh
just
yeah,
something fun?
yeah. Okay, well. First and foremostly, let's talk about something biological that we can do. So when we talk about breathing, right? We talk about breathing and breathing exercises. The problem is that and you were a great representation of this. A bias has been created because, and if this works for some people, that's great. But it actually turns a lot of people away when sages are being burned, and we're talking about doing away with negative energy. And you're like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, I don't believe in that. I don't buy that. Like, that's not for me. And all you're doing is you're pushing me away. Like, if you're going to do breathing and meditating, you should be burning sage and aligning your chakras and charging your crystals. And it's like, no. Like, when I really got into the weeds and started studying this, I was really amazed at how many of the meditative practices and how many of the key psychological skills of resilience we actually do in the military. You talk about breathing exercises, instantly guys go like, not interested. I go, okay, cool. We talk about mindfulness, guys instantly go, not interested. Okay, cool. But actually, when do we practically apply that in the military? Okay, well, I say to a guy, right, talk me through your marksmanship principles. And bang, they just reel them off. The position hold must be firm enough to whether sight alignment and sight pitch must be correct, weapon must point naturally at the target, all that type of stuff, right? They reel it off. Right, how do you aim at a target? East, eye, aperture, sight, target. Good. What are you aiming for? I'm aiming for the visible, the bottom center of the visible mass. Good. And then you're breathing. I'm breathing out, and on the exhale, when I'm fully exhaled, I'm squeezing, not pulling the trigger. And then on the ranges, you're getting screamed and shouted at. You have to run up and down. You have to run around and scream. It's absolute pandemonium. And you have to calm, breathe, and focus on exactly what you're doing. So that is mindfulness, right? Yeah. So mindfulness can be accessible. And there's lots of things that we can do. So what we're going to do is we can do a really simple one. I'm going to explain it, and then we're going to do it. Okay, so you're going to breathe in for 4 seconds, then we're going to hold for 2, then we're going to breathe in for another 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and out for 4 seconds. We're going to do that twice. So just a reminder.
Wait. So I've got to breathe in, hold for 2, and then breathe in again.
Yes. So you are going to fill your body up with as much oxygen as possible, almost as if your lungs are going to burst. I want you to fill it up.
I'm not going to breathe out between the breathing in and the breathing in.
No, you're going to breathe in for 4. Hold for 2, breathe in again for 4. Fill up your whole body with oxygen. Like, imagine you're filling your stomach with air, your lungs. I want it to be slightly uncomfortable. And then I want you to hold for 4 and then out for 4. And we're going to do that again. Okay, so we're going to do it. Okay, so ready?
We're going to do it together.
Yes. We're going to breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2. Breathe in again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. And out. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time, mate. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2. Breathe in again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And out. Sorry. You've already gone anyway. You see there, the relaxation there, when you exhale all that air out and you feel that settling of your heart rate and that calming of your body. And the reason that we're doing that is we are engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, more specifically a vagal nerve that sits at the back of the throat. And as we breathe in and we're filling ourselves up with air and we're stimulating our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest. Rather than fight or flight, we are resting and digesting. And so we are calming our body down. This is a technique.
You have to have done that at home. If you didn't do that at home, you've got to rewind and do it now. Even if you're driving, I don't care. I am not liable if you crash your car. So that's the kind of thing, I guess, that's a really simple, like mind-blowingly simple technique that people can do when they're potentially feeling a little overwhelmed.
Stressed, overwhelmed, when you're feeling your sympathetic nervous, you feel anxious, when you're feeling like on edge, when you're feeling stressed, right? Okay, let's calm our body down. Let's calm down. Let's retake control. Let's retake control of ourselves. Let's retake control of our body. Let's breathe in and let's hold. Let's breathe in again. Let's hold and let's breathe it out. Nice and controlled. Right. What am I feeling and why am I feeling it? If you can understand that your emotional responses to the world around you are based upon previous experiences, the question isn't why am I feeling this way? The question is, why is my subconscious choosing for me to feel this way? What is this based upon? What evidence? Again, apologies for people who aren't watching. The evidence I'm doing with quotation marks on my fingers again, because the evidence is going to be very flawed. So why am I feeling this way? Well, because last time I was in a situation similar to this, it didn't work out. I didn't place first. I didn't win. I made a fool of myself. I got injured. It fell apart or whatever. And you go, okay, cool. But as Aristotle says, no man walks through the same river twice, for it's not the same river and you're not the same man. You are applying the situation that happened last time from your past into your present, and that is no longer relevant. This person is not your mother. That man is not your father. This is not the experience you had in primary school. This is not the experience that you had at a family event. You will not be humiliated and degraded here. You have learned, you have grown, you are more effective as a human being. Quite often, a really simple mathematical equation that you can ask somebody is the anxiety equation. And the anxiety equation is the overestimation of the likelihood of the worst thing happening being multiplied by underestimating your ability to cope with it. When you identify the realities of both sides of that, it allows you to come to a far more balanced and rational answer.
And I think that's probably quite a useful phrase that you just said. Could you please re-explain that in Hmong? Got to remember, the majority of my listeners are my people. So, little words.
So, we can identify anxiety as a survival response. That is your central nervous system trying to ensure your survival. And it bases survival upon what we have learned from previous endeavors, mainly formed in childhood. That is where we see the most amount of growth of our limbic center, and more specifically, our hippocampus, our emotional memory bank. Okay, cool. So we absorb a lot when we're children. And the point is that quite often we overestimate the likelihood of the worst thing happening. If I step on stage, I'm going to break a heel, roll an ankle, fall forward, headbutt the lamp, pass out, and everyone's going to ignore me or laugh at me. Mike and Lisa and Bretty Smith are just going to mark me down for being an idiot, and I'm going to be unceremoniously dragged off the stage by Rick and Darren. So that's overestimating the likelihood of the worst thing happening, but also multiplying that by underestimating your ability to cope with it. If my heel breaks on stage, I'll just simply take my heel off, take my shoes off, laugh about it, drop it, and carry on my routine anyway. Actually, that would probably get me loads of bonus points for just rolling with it. So the point is that quite often we overestimate the likelihood of the worst thing and we multiply that sense of anxiety by underestimating our ability to cope with it.
And I'm sure that's something that basically everybody can relate to.
Yeah.
Every single person I've ever met can probably relate to that. Apart from my nan, she doesn't seem to care about anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of the older generation, isn't it? Is that when you get to a certain point, you realize the worst thing isn't going to happen. And even if the worst thing did happen, you're probably going to be all right. So, yeah. And you get to that age where you just stop caring.
Yeah, but no, really, really useful that. And I think worded simply, it's something you can kind of remind yourself of as an internal mantra. We all do it. You know, I'm guilty of exactly the same thing. When we if we're launching a new product, I've got 2 new product launches this month, and exactly the same thing. We'll get what is the worst possible case scenario, and then forgetting all of the coping mechanisms that we've built up in 10 years of business to deal with the worst possible scenario. So we all do it. We all do it, whether it's something that seems small or seems large. But I think it's something you've mentioned before, and you might have touched on it today. This idea that we have of dismissing our own problems. Well, we did cover it. You covered it with Broken Leg Man. Yeah.
We underestimate our emotional needs, you know, and for many reasons that we do that. Having your emotional needs dismissed as a child. I mean, how common is this phrase that we hear as a child? Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Well, how does that?
Well, hopefully less these days than when we were younger.
Yeah.
Dad, if you're listening, I know you said that.
Yeah. But how does that translate as an adult? Well, then I'm not going to cry because people got it far worse, that my emotional needs are not important. You know,
that is the correct attitude to have.
You're right. Yeah. Like I'm going to absolutely suffer in misery for the vast majority of my life and not get the help I need until I've reached rock bottom.
Yeah. I'll do it in the dark like a man.
Yeah. I'm going to absolutely fall apart and my life is going to, burst at the seams and I'm going to really struggle with my mental health. And you get to that point in your life and then you go, right, maybe I need therapy. And you think, yeah, maybe you do. And it all just stems from the fact that you've dismissed your own emotional needs for so long that it took until everything had fallen apart and your life was in a real mess before you were then willing to say, maybe I need help.
And not to make it into a massive plug for your book, although as someone who considers yourself a friend, I do think writing a book is a massive life achievement.
Thank you so very much.
Because that's something that exists way after you're gone and no one cares about you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think that's huge.
Thank you.
Where does the book come in? Because I guess you're not suggesting people don't bother with therapy. They buy a book instead, are you?
Right. Yeah. I mean, okay. So first and foremost, like the book is $8.99. If you're looking for like, I need something, I want to learn more about myself, I want to learn some techniques, the books are great.
So it is. Would you say the book is something that's more useful to have as something to read to learn something about yourself, or as a self-help style manual?
Well,
because they're very different things, aren't they?
Right. Yeah. I think the book is more about an understanding of self, and the book is about, there are so many books that inspire change. You read a book like The Body Keeps the Score. You read a book like Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? You read a book like Think Yourself Resilient by James Elliot, and you go, wow, like there are things from this that I can really apply in my life and really make a difference. There's a perspective that I hadn't considered. There's knowledge here that I had no idea about. There's so many different subjects that we sit in what Plato would call the cave of ignorance. I have no idea about, and I'm willing to stay. You mentioned at the very, very start of the podcast, about cognitive dissonance. People struggle with that cognitive dissonance. They're more than happy to sit in Plato's cave of ignorance rather than be challenged. And then you read a book and you go, there's evidence here. There's scientific evidence backing this up. That challenges, and that allows me to then challenge myself and challenge my perspective and bring out great changes in the world. And that's like the purpose of it. That's why we have it. So I think it's if resilience is something you wanted to learn how to develop, the book is a great place to start, because it's got everything in there. You don't, it's not overly filled with psychobabble, and it's not overly filled with theories, or it's not filled at all with theories that are just not applicable in the real world. And this isn't it's not autobiographical. There are small elements of lived experience within there, but it's not this isn't an autobiography. This is about the development of resilience, backed up by science, by neurobiological research, backed up by what we can observe, backed up with studies. The reference part of the book is massive, because there's so many different things that I'm referencing all the time. And I just, I don't want it to be airy-fairy, wishy-washy. I want it to be, here is the science, and here's what it shows. Here's what this data suggests. Here's what this data suggests. So if we can do this and do this, this is what this suggests. And so it's real, tangible, concrete practices that you could put into your life that create that effect and that change.
Good. Yeah. So I have been privileged enough to be sent an early release copy of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read it because it's a PDF, and I don't like reading books on computers. It's not the same. But I have ordered a paperback copy of it from Amazon. You can do that now. I believe it'll get delivered sometime in April.
Correct. So we've had the cover release and the early bird offer. And for a while, so we're filming this at the start of February. What is the date today? So it came out the week before. So it came out on the right at the very end of January, and it was number one in its category of emotional
books by James Elliot.
Yeah, Think Yourself Resilient by James Elliot. It was number 5 across all hot new releases on Amazon. So it's been like really well received so far, which is just so unbelievably overwhelming.
And if you buy a copy and you bring it to FitX, I will sign it for you.
If you buy a copy and you bring it to FitX, I will sign it for you as a thank you.
Both of us. It's up to you. Whatever the customer wants best, we'll let them decide.
I will be standing there with Rick. Well, he might not be there. He might be getting the coffees in for everybody. But yeah, and I will be there to sign the book. Yeah, for sure.
So that's cool. We've got kind of 10 more minutes if you want to fill it with anything. If there's anything you want to discuss, if there's any real world stuff you want to discuss, if there's any therapy stuff you want to discuss, or
I mean,
we can just leave it at that.
Well, there is just, I think one of the main points that I make within the book is that the people that you surround yourself with are so important to your resilience. And I think that it's really, I've overused the word important, but I'll say it again anyway. It's really important that we analyze this within the fitness industry. More and more people getting therapy, and more and more people getting support. Just be really, really aware of who it is that you're surrounding yourself with, and why it is you're surrounding yourself with them. You know, there's a great filter that you can apply to any piece of information that anyone is ever telling you, which is it true? Is it kind? And do I need to know it? And I certainly feel that, you know, as I've become more and more involved in the mental health and the fitness industry, I see more and more of a need for this filter to be applied. So
I feel like that's you dismissing 80% of the stuff I say to you.
Is it true?
Probably the first bit, but the second two, not so much.
Is it kind? And do I need to know it? And I think that's a really great way of distancing yourself from any difficulties, any dramas, any politics, is to apply that filter. And if it falls down at any one of those filters, take your dignity and leave. There's so much power in just being able to take your dignity and leave.
Is it not important sometimes to know things that are true, even if they're not particularly kind?
Oh, yeah, to a degree. If we're talking about business-wise, if we're talking about development of products, if we're talking
so you're talking just socially.
I'm talking about the general politics that rushes itself around the fitness industry. And like, how true is it? Vast majority, like we all understand, as you're speaking about, everybody sees the world from a slightly different perspective, and we'll have, you know, slightly different rules by which and ethics by which we govern our lives with. You know, always assume that there's a bigger picture, and always assume that you don't know what it is. Every single human being in the world justifies their behavior.
I saw a Star Trek clip earlier that I'm going to send you later about morality.
Oh, big fan. Yeah. Yeah, if we can understand that every single person justifies their behavior, very, very, very few people in the history of mankind have ever woken up to be the bad guy. They all justify their behavior. So what is a person's justification? Like, don't be judgmental, be curious. Like, they've probably got a lot going on in their life, or maybe I don't understand their response to that, or maybe I haven't seen the build up. You know, I'm just seeing a very, 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 very small element of this reaction, and I'm making a quick judgment off of the back of it. So it's always worth applying that filter and just being really aware that, you know, by giving someone a little bit of space, by being empathetic and accepting someone for who they are, but putting them where they belong, you generate a huge amount of peace in your life.
Yeah, no, I can see how that would generate peace in my life.
Correct.
If people want to contact you, James, you're getting busier and busier. I don't even know if you take people on for therapy anymore. Instagram, social media, email, website.
I do still take. I'm fully booked for people, but I'm a big fan of people coming to me, getting what they need, helping them find that fulfillment, and letting them go. Like you said, it isn't a process that needs to last your whole life. It's not a process that needs to last a particularly long period of your life. If, again, dependent upon the needs of the individual, but it's not a long process. You know, it doesn't have to be. Do what you need to do, learn what you need to learn, educate, support, and see you later. So it's always worth reaching out to me. I always do the very best that I can for the people who approach to be as flexible as possible. Yeah, so Instagram, James Elliot Official. I'm also on LinkedIn.
He hasn't got a blue tick.
I don't have a blue tick, I know.
But there are lots of James Elliot Officials normally.
Yeah. So yeah. But yeah, so find me, James Elliot Official. It's fairly obvious, which is obviously me. And yeah, and please do reach out if you've got any questions or you want to ask about the book. Link in bio for the book. And yeah, you know, I'm available if you want to ask any questions or want to carry on this conversation any further.
Thank you very much for coming on, James. It is an absolute pleasure. We wish you all the very best with the book launch and with all your other endeavors. And we will see you. Will I see you before Fit Expo, or will I see you at Fit Expo?
Well, you definitely see me at Fit Expo. If there's an opportunity to go up and down a mountain again together, I'll take that.
Yeah, fine. Small mountain, medium-sized mountain. Actually, I'm fitness now. I'll race you.
You are #fitness.
#fitness. Yesterday, I went for a run and did the Stairmaster.
Well, you got glutes of steel now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Are
Everything else is
are you taking a step on the stepper and then kicking your leg out backwards behind you?
I did the other day and I got cramp in my bum, so I won't be doing that again.
Legend.
But yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to pause this recording. 3, 2, 1. Goodbye, everybody.